Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
What's up, science fam? That's right, our topic for this session is all about the birds and the bees and where the babies come from and how they're made. Join me. My name is Sir Ramon and this is Science with Sir Ramon, and our topic for this session is the reproductive system, the baby-making organs and parts of the human body. So in this session, we're going to describe the parts of the reproductive system and their functions, explain the role of hormones involved in the reproductive system, and describe some of the feedback mechanisms involved in regulating the reproductive system. Alright, so what is the goal of what we call sex? What is the process of sex? From an evolutionary perspective, sex is the process by which the genetic material from two different parents combine to create offspring with high genetic diversity. Basically, we're just mixing genes. That is the goal of sex, and the primary objective of that is fertilization. Sperm and egg together. The sperm from the male parent and the egg from the female parent will mix genes, creating more diversity for their offspring. This gives their offspring a greater chance of surviving in an increasingly variable environment. So it's very beneficial if your environment is always changing. So this is the reason why you and your siblings are different. Alright, so what do you have down there? Right? Down there, down there. It's different for different people. And generally, normally, what we look at in order to determine the sex of a person, the biological sex, or whether they're boy or girl, is their external genitalia. But is it really? Is that what makes you a man or a woman? Actually, biological sex is determined by both genes, the chromosomes, the sex chromosomes, and hormones, the hormones that are in your body. So this is a very important concept, because biological sex, since it's determined by both chromosomes and hormones, that's why there are some people who have hormone replacement therapy, in which they use hormones in order to influence their biological sex, at least in how their body expresses physically its traits. So let's give a short discussion on what we mean by the term SOGIE, S-O-G-I-E. So this is a hot topic term in the Philippines because of the SOGIE bill. Now, when we say SOGIE, this is basically talking about two things. Sexual orientation, the SO part, is basically the attraction to a particular sex or gender, or multiple. So it's what you find attractive. Whereas gender identity and expression is the outward expression of gender through actions or behavior, or how you express yourself. If you're more ladylike in your actions and behavior, or more male-like in your actions and behavior. And these are things that are ascribed to how society thinks males or females should act. So these are completely independent of biological sex. You could have a certain biological sex and a completely different sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. Now, the important concept here is that when you're asked to provide your biological sex, whether you're male or female, you have to be honest. Even if you have a different SOGIE, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, you have to be honest about your biological sex, because again, it's determined by genes and hormones, things that can affect how things like medicine or chemicals can affect your body. Alright? So we have to respect the sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression of people, while also accepting the biological sex. However, biological sex in itself is not that clear cut. So there's male and female, yes, but there's also intersex conditions, typically due to genetic disorders or hormonal imbalance. So again, it's not always male and female. So normally, your males have X and Y sex chromosomes, and your females have two X chromosomes. So we'll see some of the intersex conditions in a bit. First is the XX intersex condition. So normally, XX, if you have two X chromosomes, you are a female. Genetically, you're a female, but in the XX intersex condition, it's the person is genetically female, but their clitoris developed in such a way that it resembles a penis, and it's due to excess male hormones. So again, the hormonal imbalance caused the intersex condition. XY intersex, on the other hand, is genetically male, so X and Y means you become a male, but external genitalia are malformed, ambiguous, or clearly female. So it's like penis ain't there. And there could be a vestigial vagina, but it depends on the exact hormonal or enzyme abnormality or imbalance in this particular individual. So again, anything goes when you have differences in your hormone levels. That's how much hormones can affect the physical characteristics of your body. True intersex is another intersex condition where it can be either genotype, meaning it can be XX or XY, but they possess both ovarian and testicular tissues, which means they have male and female parts of the reproductive system kind of mixing and matching down there. So this is actually very difficult, and usually that means they're infertile both as a male and as a female because it's just not enough parts in order to constitute a working reproductive system. So these are some images, diagrams of the spectrum of intersex conditions as well as the normal biological sex external genitalia. So we have the quintessential female and quintessential male here for babies, but in the middle are the spectrum of intersex conditions. So you can see here that some of the organs and functions, some of the parts in the female transition to some of the parts of the male, and so on and so forth. So that's why for true intersex, it can't have both reproductive systems, because in the early development of the embryo, the early cells develop into either the ovarian tissues or the testicular tissues, only one at a time. Okay, so they come from somewhere. All right, so there are also complex disorders that are caused by genetic disorders. So earlier we were talking about hormonal imbalances. Now we're going to focus on genetic disorders. So one is Klinefelter syndrome. It's a male with an extra X chromosome. Your Turner syndrome is a female lacking an X chromosome, so it's X and then no extra sex chromosome. And your triple X syndrome is a female with extra X chromosome. So these kinds of syndromes have pronounced effects on the physical characteristics of someone. Usually they have stunted growth, they have mental problems, mental growth and development problems, and the details of these syndromes will be tasked to you guys in your brainstorm discussion. So let's get to the actual parts of a biologically female and biologically male person. So let's start with the boys, the male reproductive system. Now we have a license to say penis for class. So what is the goal of the male reproductive system? What is the mission of its part? It's basically to create and deliver sperm and to ensure the survival of the sperm until conception. That is the single-minded goal of the male reproductive system. It doesn't care about anything else. The well-being of the female, no, whatever. Who cares? Just get that sperm there, where it needs to go. So let's trace the journey of the sperm. Take note of where they pass through the male reproductive system. So first, we have this image that shows the male reproductive system. So we begin our journey here in the testes or the testicles, otherwise known colloquially as the balls. So let's talk about that. The testicles are the sperm factory of your male reproductive system. Your sperm cells are made in the testicles. Now, we have a term called gonad. When you hear the term gonad or read the term gonad, it refers to the the factory, the site of creation of your haploid cells, of your gametes. So your testes and your ovaries are your gonad, so where the sex cells are made. Now your testicles contain highly coiled seminiferous tubules. They're just basically very small, thin tubes where it increases surface area so that you can make more sperm. Just maximize the production of sperm cells. Now the thing is, your testicles need to be maintained at just 2 degrees Celsius lower than body temperature. It has to be slightly colder than your body temperature. Now how do we keep the testicles cool and cozy? That is the job of the scrotum, also known as the ball sack. So what it does is that it adjusts the position of your testicles. So it adjusts the distance according to temperature. Closer will make it warm as it cuddles next to the rest of your body. Okay, so that's the function of the scrotum. Now your sperm does not pass through the scrotum. Your scrotum simply holds the testicles and adjusts the distance from the body. All right. Next is the epididymis, the next stage. So from the testicle, your sperm cells will go to the epididymis. So the epididymis is this entire structure from here all the way down here. So this long structure here has a very long path which is just there so that it can delay the delivery of sperm until the sperm are mature. See, when the sperm cells are made, they're not ready yet. They're not ready to do their job. They're still little baby sperms. So they need to mature until they can make the journey to the egg cell when they are delivered there. Alright, so the epididymis is like the waiting room, the growing room of your sperm cells. So at ejaculation, when they are called to their mission, where do the sperm go? When the guy nut, what structures do they go through? So from the epididymis, they sound the alarm, hey, it's time to go, boys, let's do this. The sperm will go through first the vas deferens. So again, from your testicles, it goes through the epididymis to mature, and after maturation, when it's called to action, it goes through the vas deferens, a very long tube. So this is the vas deferens. It's a duct that transports sperm, and there is something that adds stuff to the sperm as it travels through the vas deferens. A pair of glands that adds a special fluid. So this is called the seminal vesicle. So now we have a side view of your diagram. So from the vas deferens, it coils around inside your body until it passes the seminal vesicle. This is a pair. Again, there's two seminal vesicles, a pair of glands that secrete what we call seminal fluid. So the seminal fluid is basic, meaning alkaline pH. It's not acidic, it's the opposite of acidic. It has fructose, a type of sugar, and it has mucus, like the sticky mucus, same as the mucus from your nose. So the function of all of this is to keep your sperm alive, because your seminal fluid has the nutrition that it needs as well as the fluid cushion that the sperm needs in order to survive its journey. So when you mix your sperm cells and your seminal fluid, you get what we call the semen. The S-E-M-E-N, that's the semen. Alright? Now, your ejaculatory duct, after the vas deferens, it's a new duct called the ejaculatory duct that is right after the seminal vesicles, and it joins together at what we call the urethra, the final duct leading out of the male reproductive system. Now, your ejaculatory ducts, right before ejaculation, your semen will collect there in those ducts. So, your urethra in the middle, your ejaculatory ducts on the sides, your semen collects there to build up pressure right before ejaculation of the dude. Now, that pressure releases the sperm, the semen, at an average speed of 11 meters per second. Think, 11 meters is probably like across an entire room or even across two rooms, and it's per second. Imagine shooting your cells at that speed. It can take an eye out. That's fast enough even to kill sperm through whiplash if there was no seminal fluid. So again, the seminal fluid is there to ensure that your sperm survive the pressure that is subjected to it. Now, what is the big gland that usually is checked up in older guys? So, you know, the checkup where they put it through the butthole and then just feel for the big gland. This big gland is the prostate gland. So in this diagram here, we can see the prostate gland. Over here, it is much bigger than your seminal vesicle, but there's only one of it. Your seminal vesicles are come in pairs. Your prostate gland is one big gland, and it secretes what we call prostatic fluid straight into the urethra. So it doesn't really mix with the semen. It just secretes it into the urethra, the final tube leading out of the penis. So this prostatic fluid, its function is to prepare the urethra for the passage of semen. So it neutralizes any acidity, it washes out any urine, and it has citrate and anticoagulants to make sure that the mucus in your seminal fluid does not make it harden in your urethra. It keeps it fluid and flowing. And take note that the anticoagulants in your prostatic fluid, when it's heated up, they tend to be deactivated. What that means is that, boys, if you're washing up, if you use hot water, that tends to make it clump up into very solid mucus. So use cold water, hot tip. Alright, now your bulbourethral glands perform a very similar function. They secrete mucus to neutralize acidity from the urine. So this also adds mucus lining to your urethra, and this is what's normally called the pre-cum. Okay, so normally there's fluid coming out of the penis when it is aroused, when it is excited to do the process of sex. There is a fluid that drips out, but it's very clear. This is the mucus from your bulbourethral glands. Now the urethra, the final duct, is the passageway of both semen and urine. So, it's kind of disgusting for guys, not gonna lie. So it's like it's both where you pee through and where you nut through. And of course, the term for the male organ, the male external genitalia, the penis. The penis is composed of erectile tissue. It's mostly muscle with lots of blood vessels in it. And the purpose of that erectile tissue, or the muscles with lots of blood vessels, is that it allows the penis to become engorged with blood during erection. So, boners, stiffies, these erect penises are actually erect because they are filled with blood. Keep sharp objects away. It is not fun. Now, there are some parts of the penis, that we should be aware of. There's the glans, or the head of the penis. You can see in this diagram here that it looks like a mushroom. That mushroom head is the glans, and supposedly it helps so that it plugs up the hole, the vaginal canal, so that when the sperm or the semen is released, the semen does not immediately just flow back out. It's supposed to go one way. It's a one-way journey. All right? Your foreskin, on the other hand, so your penis is normally covered in a protective layer called the foreskin. Now, this protective covering in many societies, including ours, is removed, partially removed, in a process called circumcision. So that's actually mostly a cultural thing. It does help with hygiene and cleanliness, but it's actually not that important. You can just take a bath every day, even if you have the foreskin still there, so, and that is still healthy. So just a cultural thing. Why not? Let's cut off the skin of the penis, right? Fine. Now we move on to the female reproductive system, and now we have the license to say vagina in class. So what is the main goal of the female reproductive system? For the males, it's to create and deliver sperm. For the females, it's to produce eggs and to develop the embryo. It's a very heavy task. It's a very costly process. So it really focuses on ensuring the health and the safety of the offspring. That means that it gives less care to making sure that the sperm survive, or even that the mother is comfortable. It utilizes all the resources in order to make sure that the embryo develops properly and safely. Now, these are parts of the female reproductive system. We can see in this image a summary from side view of the part. So take note that, of course, the rectum is in the digestive system. It's not part of it. What we're talking about is this system in the middle. This one on the left is part of the digestive system where the poop goes through. This one on the right is where the urine goes through. For females, their female reproductive system is sandwiched between the two in the form of the uterus, the vaginal canal, and the vulva. So we're going to get into detail on that in a bit. So, first we have the ovaries, the female gonads. So, in the outer layer of the ovaries, we have follicles, and inside each follicle, we have oocytes. Now, these oocytes will mature and eventually become an ovum or an egg cell. Now, they only ever release one egg cell at a time. Even though there's two ovaries, an egg cell is only released one at a time from one side at a time. All right? Now, the oviducts, the one at a time thing, that applies most of the time, but of course you have the concept of paternal twins, which is when two egg cells are fertilized. So that happens when there's an anomaly in the normal process. That's why twins are so rare, that are not identical. Oviducts or fallopian tubes are the tubes leading out from the ovary. So you can see that here. That's the fallopian tube. And there are cilia, little tiny hair-like things along these tubes that convey the egg along the tube. Now, this is also called the site of fertilization because your egg cell, your unfertilized ovum, will wait in the fallopian tube for the sperm. That's right, the sperm needs to reach from out here, going all the way there, and then going into the correct fallopian tube. There's two options, 50-50 chance of actually encountering the ovum there. And again, just to emphasize, the female reproductive system does not care about the survival of the sperm. Throughout that entire journey, the vagina, the uterus, it's a hostile environment. It's acidic, it kills sperm. It's not easy, all right? It's like a wasteland for sperm. Next is the uterus. The endometrium lines the inside. It's basically the inner lining of the uterus. The middle part is called the myometrium, and the outer part is the perimetrium. So these prefixes are things you will see in biology very, very often. Endo means inside, myo means middle, and peri means on the perimeter or on the outside. So remember these prefixes, they will help you in the future. So what is the gateway to the womb? Knock, knock. The gateway is called the cervix. It's the neck of the uterus, so it protects the uterus from the outside environment, which means that you're not supposed to get anything through there. It will hurt getting things through there. Do not break the gate down. That is a wrong, all right? So the cervix is supposed to only allow the semen through, nothing else. Infections of this and inflammations of this tend to be very painful, and is the reason why there's an entire branch of doctors that specialize in caring for the cervix and the female reproductive system, your obstetrician gynecologists. All right. Now, the vagina is actually a term for the canal leading up to the cervix from the outside. So it's the passageway at birth. So when the baby comes out, it goes to the vaginal canal. It's also the site of insertion for the penis being a long, floppy erectile tissue. So it has to be inserted there. And it's also the site of deposition of the semen. So the semen starts out in that starting point, the vaginal canal. Now again, it's the canal, not the external part of the female system, which has its own name. So within this canal, within the vaginal canal, sometimes we have what we call the hymen. The hymen is a membrane that may or may not cover the opening of the vaginal canal. Now, they say that if a female is a virgin, then their hymen should be intact. That is wrong, because the hymen is not always present. So we see here on the lower right, there is no hymen there. It didn't develop. It just didn't. It's just so vestigial that you don't have an actual hymen anymore. This kind of hymen, where it's very thick and clear and it's like completely closed off, that's very, very rare. So we can't rely on the hymen as the proof that someone is a virgin. In fact, virginity is a social construct. In other words, it's just a term that we made up to describe someone who has or has not had sex. There is no biological determinant to show whether someone has had sex or not, except maybe, bruising and what's this, friction marks. But that can also be from other things like very, very rough biking, horseback riding, or even masturbation. So it's not a clear-cut way of determining if someone's a virgin. Same for guys. There's no way to determine if a guy's a virgin or not, biologically speaking. So virginity is still a social construct, and we shouldn't care so much about it. Next, the vulva. The vulva is the proper term for the female external genitalia, and there's a few parts of it that we should be aware of. We have the labia minora and labia majora. These are the folds of skin. The labia minora are more on the inner part. So in the inner labia here, the inner folds are called the labia minora, and the labia majora are the outer folds. Now, for different females, for different people, the labia majora can have different sizes. Some are very, very small, and some are very, very large folds. It's not an indicator of how active they are. Again, just because someone has very thick or very large folds on their vulva, that doesn't mean that they're sexually active. It could be just a genetic thing. Now, another part that should be discussed is the clitoris. It's a very sensitive nub near the upper apex, upper tip of the vulva, and it's usually covered by a clitoral hood. So it's about the size of a pea, or even smaller, and it's very, very sensitive. The reason for that is because the nerve endings that go to the clitoris are actually remnants of the nerve endings that would have been connected to the penis if the person developed into a male. See, when we're embryos, when we're fetuses in the womb, we actually all start out as sort of having external genitalia that look like females, and eventually it turns into penis if the sex chromosomes are X and Y. In other words, when we're developing as babies, it's ladies first, right? So again, the clitoris is very sensitive. If ever there's any point in time when you have to deal with the clitoris, you have to be gentle with it. It's very sensitive. It can actually hurt very easily. All right, so be gentle with it. All right. So next, what baby essential organ is present on both sexes, but is nowhere near the crotch? So part of the reproductive system is actually the mammary glands. Now the only difference between guy mammary glands or breasts and girl mammary glands or breasts is in the hormones. For girls, their hormones, specifically estrogen and progesterone, actually develop the mammary glands so that they become larger so that they can produce milk when they become pregnant. Dudes can actually also lactate if they have the proper hormones or a diet that gives them these hormones. Actually, malunggay, if you eat several kilograms of malunggay, it can actually cause you to lactate. So fun, right? Guys, if you ever want to make milk, eat your malunggay. So another concept in the reproductive system is gametogenesis, or the formation of sex cells. And we should have discussed this in last year. So just a review of your gametogenesis, how your sperm and your eggs are made. Spermatogenesis is when your spermatogonium turns into a spermatocyte on the left side here. So spermatogonium turns into spermatocyte, undergoes meiosis 1 to become secondary spermatocytes, then meiosis 2 to become the spermatids, which develop into sperm cells. But basically, take note that one cell turns into 4 sperm cells in spermatogenesis, whereas in oogenesis, you have one oogonium turning into one oocyte, turning into one secondary oocyte, one ootid, and one ovum. Meaning, in oogenesis, it only makes one egg cell out of one oogonium. That means that egg cells are more precious than sperm cells. That's why in semen, you can have hundreds, thousands of sperm cells, but there's only one ovum in the fallopian tube of a woman, normally speaking. So that's oogenesis, all right? Next, let's talk about hormone control, how it overlaps with the endocrine system, how hormones control the male and female reproductive system. For male hormonal control, it's mostly controlled by testosterone. Now, there are other hormones that control the male reproductive system, but we won't get into detail on that. You'll see the details of that if you go through the STEM track in senior high school. But basically, testosterone is the male sex hormone that produces male characteristics like broad shoulders, deep voice, and promotes continuous sperm production. The balls or the testicles continuously and constantly produce sperm. Now, the reason for that is because we need a lot of sperm cells when the guy ejaculates, because again, the female reproductive system tends to kill off the sperm. So the guy needs to use numbers to his advantage to make sure at least one gets to the egg cell. Now, this continuous production of sperm may also cause you guys to have wet dreams. What that means is that you wake up and you have a wet splotch on your crotch. That's because your male reproductive system just excreted extra seminal fluids and extra sperm cells if you haven't been dealing with that manually through masturbation. So it's normal. It's fine. It happens because of the continuous sperm production. All right? Okay. Next, for female hormonal control, we have the menstrual cycle. Your womb, girls, is basically constantly asking, where's the sperm? Where is the sperm that will meet the egg? Where is it? Once it meets and forms the embryo, then it gets to work, but without it, it throws a temper tantrum. All right? So without the fertilization, the menstrual cycle occurs. It's just a very bloody cycle. So the menstrual cycle is actually why we should treat women, all women, as hardcore. Because this 28-day cycle is punctuated by the period or the menstrual flow. Basically bleeding from the vagina. What's happening in the menstrual cycle for the benefit of the guys out there and maybe some of the girls that have not explored what the menstruation or menstrual cycle means. So it's basically in 4 parts. The first part is the period or the menstrual flow. The second part is the thickening phase when the endometrium or the inner lining of the uterus thickens. The third phase is the fertile phase when there is most likely the event of ovulation or the release of a mature ovum. And the infertile phase, which is basically when the ovum is already dissolved and the uterus and the entire female reproductive system is getting ready to start the process again. Alright, so take note that even though it says infertile phase, this phase can vary in length and schedule. So as a form of contraception, of mapping out, like using a calendar to map out your menstrual cycle, it's not reliable because external stimuli, the environment, can cause ovulation to become earlier or later and can also change the length of the infertile phase. So no, do not try to use calendars as contraception. Alright, so let's talk about what's happening here and why this happens. So the menstrual cycle or the uterine cycle happens because, again, the female reproductive system wants to make sure that the offspring survives. So it gets everything ready. It gets the uterus ready, all of the blood vessels and nerve endings that are necessary to make sure that the embryo develops into a healthy baby are readied every 28 days. Now, this costs a lot of resources, so it can't be ready all the time. It has to have some downtime. That's why females have a menstrual cycle or a uterine cycle. There's a phase where they're ready for pregnancy and a phase where they have to prepare again. It's just setting up and tearing stuff down, setting up and tearing stuff down. So let's go to phase 1, the menstrual flow or the period part of the menstrual cycle. It's basically, oh God, why am I bleeding from my orifice? So girls, yes, girls bleed from their vagina on a sort of monthly basis. Again, usually 28 days. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer. And this menstrual flow does not finish in one day. No, sir. It can last up to a week, maybe even more. And it varies in terms of the amount of blood flow and the amount of pain that they suffer. This is painful. This is draining. This is taxing. So guys, be respectful. Number 1, do not try to find out when a girl's period is. When they're being mad at you and you say, are you on your period? That is a one-way ticket to getting slapped. Okay? That is rude. Whether it's true or not, whether they're on their period or not, that is just a basically rude question. And number 2, if you do somehow know that your friend is on their period, if they share to you that they're on their period, be gentle with them, all right? They're going through a tough time. So, in the menstrual flow, what's happening is that the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus, comes off. Literally, the skin of the uterus, it's coming off, bleeding everywhere, and that's the reason why menstrual blood is chunky, because there's the chunks of the endometrium in it. So it's horrible. It's painful. Imagine like your inner skin getting scratched off, but it's doing it to itself. It hurts. So, because of the flow of blood from the vagina, there are some tools and items that are necessary in order to make sure that, no accidents occur. So we have these 3 that are the most common. We have the menstrual cup, which is basically a cup that covers the cervix so that the blood flow and anything else gets trapped in the cup. All right? Now, this has to be removed once the period is done and then cleaned. Now, the female reproductive system has to be cleaned. Now, your tampon and your sanitary napkin are disposable types of menstrual sanitary tools. Your tampon is basically a plug. It is inserted, and then it is taken out of the covering. It is inserted, and then the string hangs outside so that it can be easily removed. So it's very similar to the menstrual cup, but it doesn't necessarily hug the cervix. It's just there to absorb the blood. So as it absorbs the blood, it engorges with blood because it's made of a cotton or a cloth material, and it forms a plug. Now, the most common in the Philippines is the sanitary napkin because we have this thing against the idea of it just being stuck there. So for a lot of girls, they use sanitary napkins, which is basically a cover on the panty. It's usually attached to the underwear so that it covers the vulva, catching any blood and other stuff in the sanitary napkin. Now, guys, if you're asked to buy sanitary napkins for your female family members or even for your friends, don't feel embarrassed or bad. It is a need, it is a necessity, and if you really want to be a true gentleman, true white knight, maybe even a little bit of a simp, you can carry sanitary napkins in your bag in case your female friends have their period start early or something like that. I swear to you, it is very nice to be able to offer this when your friend is having trouble, because it's very embarrassing when the menstrual flow starts and they don't have a sanitary napkin. It's just horrible. All right, so you can be a good friend by having a spare one of these in your pack. Next is the proliferative phase. It's basically the thickening phase. Now, this is when the endometrium starts to thicken again. It's the preparation for pregnancy. So the new endometrium thickens to prep as much as possible for pregnancy, which happens if the sperm reaches the ovum during the fertile phase. The fertile phase is when ovulation occurs, when the follicle of an ovary secretes the mature ovum and it waits in the fallopian tube. So again, once it becomes fertilized in the fallopian tube, it will move to the uterus. But if it's not fertilized, it will go to the infertile phase where the ovum is broken down and dissolved into basic materials or biomolecules, and the endometrium starts to get thicker because of the hormonal controls. Again, it's like a runaway reaction. The hormonal control keeps making it thicker, but since there is no baby or embryo to make use of all of these resources, that thickening of the endometrium will eventually lead to, again, phase 1, which is the menstrual flow, when the engorged endometrium has to be torn off again. Now, after about 500 cycles, so 500 months or so, maybe a bit less because it's 28 days, there is something that happens to females. We call it menopause. See, the ovaries are made up of a finite, a set amount of follicles. That means that it has a set amount of ova or egg cells, that it can produce. So it can't produce any more new eggs. And that means that as women grow older, it becomes increasingly more difficult to have a healthy pregnancy. Although, because of medical science, there's no pressure. So don't pressure yourself to have a baby in your 20s if you're not ready. But menopause is a thing around 40 to 50 years old where the menstrual cycle completely ceases because the ovaries are spent. There's literally no egg cells left. And this also changes the hormonal cycles in women. So apart from not having any egg cells, their hormonal production is different already, which is why there are changes to their bodies that make them have less libido or less aroused or less want sex less, as well as changing their body type. So that's what menopause is. Now, let's talk about sex. Let's talk about the sexual response, the science behind sex. So we're going to talk a bit about some of the topics that may be floating around in your head, some topics that you may have searched in the internet or have heard from your friends. Now, there are 4 main phases in the sexual response process: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. We're going to go through each one, and we're going to talk about some topics that are related to each one. First step is the excitement phase. So in the excitement phase, it's basically the signs of it is the vasocongestion of the penis and the clitoris, and the myotonia in the nipples or limbs. What this means is that your vasocongestion is that it's engorged with blood. The penis and the clitoris get stiff. The vagina becomes lubricated because it secretes mucus and other fluids in the vaginal canal in order to make it as comfortable as possible. Now, when a female is not excited, there's very little chance of lubrication. When a female is excited, it can or cannot be lubricated. So again, just because a female is quote-unquote wet does not mean that they want sex. It's just a biological response. to get ready for the imminent sexual interaction. Now, again, it doesn't mean that the girl wants sex. This is not consent. Just because it's wet, it's not consent. All right. So, important concept is the concept of consent. If the person does not say explicitly that they want sex, there's no consent. Right? If the person is inebriated, even if they are wet, they say they want it, but they're drunk, they can't give consent because they are drunk. They are not thinking properly. So there's no consent there. All right? So always have consent before doing any business, right? Now, after the excitement phase, before we move on, the excitement phase is greatly aided by what we call foreplay. So the term foreplay just means stimulating your partner or yourself in order to make sure that the excitement phase is at its peak, meaning either the vagina is sufficiently lubricated or the penis is sufficiently stimulated so that it is very erect, but not too erect. I mean, not too battered and bruised. Right? So again, foreplay is essential for comfort for yourself and or for your partner. Next is the plateau phase. It's a direct stimulation phase, direct stimulation of the genitalia. So in the plateau phase, a depression, a hole, not really a hole as in like this, more of a depression, like a cavity forms at the back of the vaginal canal near the cervix. So the reason for that is to accommodate in case the penis is very large, so it can actually, it kind of expands. Babies go through there during childbirth, so it can take a lot. All right. So that depression forms at the back of the vagina, and another purpose of that is that when semen is released, the semen will flow towards that cavity or depression near the cervix. It directs the semen there. Now, during the plateau phase or the direct stimulation phase, there's high breathing and heart rate. All right. So, again, this is direct stimulation. Now, different people have different levels of different preferences for stimulation. All right, some like it gentle, some like it a bit more rough. So we have to be aware and compassionate enough to ask ourselves and ask any partners we might have what is best for them. Right? Next is the orgasm phase. After enough stimulation, there is there could be the presence of orgasm. Not everyone experiences orgasm during sex. However, it is an important part in the male reproductive process. See, males only ejaculate during orgasm. They only release their semen during orgasm. So the function of the orgasm for males is to give a pleasure response to the brain, saying, hey, you did your evolutionary job, as well as to have the semen be emitted or ejaculated at high speeds. For the females, they also have that pleasure response, and also there's rhythmic involuntary contractions that may help the semen travel through the vaginal canal, as well as make the cervix more relaxed and capable of allowing semen through. So orgasms, they feel good, but that feel good feeling is really just an evolutionary response to tell you good job for your trying to reproduce. But again, the orgasm is actually why a lot of people think a lot of people would do sex for fun. It's not just for reproduction for people, because for people, we're the only species confirmed to have a pleasure response in sex. So yeah, this is one reason why people sometimes want to do it for fun, and we shouldn't judge them very harshly just because they do this, as long as they're responsible. More on that in a bit. Again, the male orgasm has emission and ejaculation. The female orgasm has the contraction of the female reproductive parts. Now, finally, is the resolution phase is when everything calms down. So after orgasm, usually the entire body goes into a refractory period or a cool down mode. For guys, this refractory period is a bit sizable. It usually takes guys a long time to feel ready again. Their libido just drops. They feel fine already. They don't want to do sex anymore, and the penis generally does not maintain its erection anymore. It's like, okay, we're done. Let's take a break for like 5 minutes. Females have a refractory period as well, but it tends to be shorter. Sometimes they don't even need breaks. So there's that. Have fun, girls. Now, since we talked about sex and the sexual process, we have to talk about reproductive health, being safe, sane, and responsible with reproduction. Now, again, some people use sex solely for reproduction. That's great. Some people use sex for recreation or for fun, and that's fine as well. Okay, as long as we are responsible and safe. How do we do this and why do we do this? So what are the risks that you take when you have sex? So the two main risks of sex are, number one, venereal diseases. These are sexually transmitted diseases. And number two, unwanted pregnancy, when we're not ready to raise a child. So these are the two risks, and how do we minimize these risks? We'll get to that in a bit. When we talk about venereal diseases, some of them, let's talk about some of them. For bacterial infections, we have chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis. This is a bacterial infection of the reproductive system that can affect both guys and girls. Now, as an example of one of them, syphilis causes the canker sores or the cankers. So these can be found on hands, on mouth, on the crotch area. So the cankers themselves are annoying. They're itchy and painful and inflamed and fluid filled. But late stage syphilis is even worse because it can cause loss of vision. You can go blind, you can go deaf, you can lose memory and have mental illness. That's that bad, this bacterial infection. But fortunately, most bacterial infections are treatable. On the other hand, we have parasitic infections, which are infections due to parasites. So we have pubic lice and trichomoniasis. So pubic lice, not public lice. What? No, that's a typo. Pubic lice is commonly known as crabs, so that's lice in your hair, pubic hair. Trichomoniasis is a microscopic parasitic organism. I'll leave the details to you guys in your brainstorm discussion. Now, viral infections like HSV, HPV, and HIV, these are generally incurable. Again, they're generally incurable at later stages. So these viral infections are very, very dangerous. In particular, we have HSV, herpes simplex virus, or herpes for short. They create very painful sores and there's no cure. Absolutely no cure. We can just treat the sores to alleviate the pain, but you can't be cured of it. You can spread it to other people. So there's two types. We have oral and genital herpes. HIV or AIDS are terms for the virus and the syndrome that you can get from the late stages of the virus. So HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus. It's basically a virus that tells your immune system to attack itself. That's why it's very dangerous. And AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. This is the state where your immune system, your entire immune system, is compromised by the HIV virus. So AIDS is stage 3 HIV. At stages 1 and 2 of HIV infection, it's actually possible to treat the HIV and prevent it from progressing to AIDS. So again, it can be treated to avoid progressing to AIDS, but the HIV will still be there. So unfortunately, HIV has very generic symptoms. It's basically flu symptoms. So it's hard to tell when you should get checked for HIV infection. So that's why the World Health Organization really recommends early testing, and why there's multiple campaigns and advocacies for HIV testing, and to remove the stigma of HIV testing, because it's important to detect it early so that it does not progress to AIDS. So how do we decrease risk? How do we decrease the risk of all these infections and decrease the risk of unwanted pregnancy? What methods and tools are available? The number one way with 100% effectiveness, there's absolutely no chance of getting any STDs or unwanted pregnancies, is abstinence. Basically, just don't have sex. If you're not ready for a baby, if you don't want to risk, if you don't want to go through the worry of getting AIDS or venereal diseases, just don't have sex. It's actually not that great. Not that I would know. I'm a good boy. But basically, if you're not ready to have sex, just don't. There's no pressure. There shouldn't be any pressure, and you shouldn't let anybody pressure you if you're not ready. Second most accessible option for people who do want to have sex is available even in convenience stores. We have condoms. Condoms are basically rubber sheets for the male organ. They go on the male organ, the penis, and basically they prevent the sperm or the semen from, even going out to the female reproductive system. So you shouldn't put it on like this lady's putting it on. That's very violent, right? That could even break the condom. Condoms are strong, but not that strong, right? So for condoms, there's this tip where the semen can be deposited and the rest will be stretchy enough to fit any sort of penis. Again, one size fits all. Those condoms that say they're magnum or large sized, you will never need. Even the most jumbo sized penises can use regular sized condoms. Now, flavored condoms, they're mostly just scented, all right? Most of them do not taste like their flavor. Don't ask how I know this. But again, condoms, their main point is to prevent the semen from reaching the female reproductive system, as well as to prevent STD transmission, because there's no direct contact from the penis to the female reproductive system. Excuse me, I have an alarm, a weird alarm. All right, next. What other methods are there? The less accessible methods are birth control pills, shots, implants, and intrauterine devices. These are not that available in the Philippines because it's highly stigmatized to have birth control here, unfortunately. There are a lot of doctors now, newer, younger doctors, who offer these medical devices and tools, as well as organizations that offer these, although they can be a bit pricey. So pills, shots, and implants use hormones to control the female cycle. So all three of these use hormones to help prevent the prevent contraception. So that's their main function, to prevent contraception and to control hormone levels. So there's several side effects for women. So that's why it's not that ideal to have pills, shots, and implants, although they are very reliable. So this is an example of an IUD or an intrauterine device. So it basically looks like a it basically looks like a T, and that T just points towards the fallopian tubes as well as out through the cervix. So these intrauterine devices contain copper as a spermicidal compound. So copper, just copper metal, kills sperm. So since the sperm has to pass through here to get to the ovum at the fallopian tubes, the sperm will die. So it's very, very effective at preventing unwanted pregnancy. So basically, yes, sex is cool. If you want to do it, fine. But more than it being cool and fun, it's best to remember to be respectful and responsible. Yes, sex is cool, but remember always to consider your partner or yourself if you're ready for this act, and make sure that you are responsible enough to use one of the tools and methods that are outlined earlier on. So again, be safe, sane, and responsible, both with partners or with yourself. So that's pretty much it for this session. I'll see you guys next time.
Party's over.